So good morning again. Welcome to the first of two sessions that we have organized along with the US FDA and USAID under the Medical Device Regulatory Convergence Project COVID-19. We are going to be talking about unique device identification during the session today and the following one on January 27th. We are, as we generally do, just some housekeeping messages to remember for everybody that this session is going to be recorded. Actually, it's being recorded already and will become available through the coalition's website. We do have simultaneous interpretation for English, Portuguese, and Spanish. You can access that through the icon that is located at the bar menu in the bottom of your screens, and you can switch from one language to the other. Microphones of all the participants are closed as to prevent any background noise that may prevent for a proper listening of the speakers. And we kindly request for all of you to post your questions through the Q&A feature that is also located at the bottom of your screens. So we may have Vesa voicing those questions to the speakers. And for the speakers, we appreciate you turning on your cameras during your presentations so we may facilitate the work of the interpreters and make it more accurate. So thank you very much. Welcome again. Wish you the best for this 2022, being this our first session in this new year, and look forward for a very fruitful conversation during today's session. So the final agenda for our event is as follows. We will have Catherine Serrano sharing a welcome message for the attendees. Then we will have the review of the UDI system from a global perspective, and also in regards to the documents produced by IMDRF on this topic. We'll have a Q&A session, and then we will be closing our event. So welcome again, and Catherine, welcome, and thank you very much for joining and for all the support from FDA for the capacity development initiatives that are under the MDRC project. So Catherine, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Sandra and the coalition. We're really thrilled to be here with you today to kick off this first of two webinars dedicated to the topic of unique device identification, or UDI. UDI is a topic of a lot of interest around the globe, with many countries seeking to use UDI to better track and trace medical devices throughout their life cycles. During the pandemic, I think it's become particularly clear how critical it is for all of us to be able to share information with one another for a more rapid and accurate response. And being able to do so really requires that we have confidence that we're all talking about the same product when we're making decisions, or as we learn about and react to field alerts and recalls. UDI systems can really help provide us better tools to be able to do just that. The webinar today is structured to present the fundamentals of UDI systems and to provide a more global vision for their use. Next week, we'll focus on trying to describe in greater detail how UDIs are used by regulators, but also other stakeholders like healthcare providers and industry. And in general, I think we just really appreciate the ability to continue to provide educational webinars as part of the Medical Device Regulatory Convergence Project. We appreciate all of you who are participating today, and as well as those who have participated in our past events. And we're really looking forward to you participating actively in these webinars during the next 2 weeks. Thank you so much. And without further ado, I'll actually turn the mic over to the moderator of this session, Vesa Vunici. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie and Sandra, for the introductions. I'm Vesa Vunici. I'm the International Relations Specialist for the FDA Latin America office. It is my pleasure to moderate the session today. With that, I would also like to take the opportunity to welcome everyone and thank you everyone for joining us today. It is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker for today's event. She will, Indira Kanduri will be presenting the vision for global UDI system. She currently serves as the Deputy Director for the Division of Regulatory Programs at CDRH. her current role. In her current role, she's actively engages in leading UDI program implementation efforts. Indira joined the FDA in the year 2000 as an IT specialist. She later became chief of the information analysis branch, where she initiated and led the successful launch of the electronic medical device reporting, or EMDR program. Previously, Indira worked at Health Resources and Services Administration as the chief of the compliance branch. In 2011, Indira returned to CRH to work on the UDI program and served as the program manager for the Good ID until 2019, when she left to work for FDA's Office of Regulatory Affairs. She worked there as a business process manager for the FDA system that receives and processes FDA-regulated imported products. Indira really brings a wealth of knowledge. I welcome Indira, and Indira, you're welcome to take the floor. Thank you. Indira, may I ask for you to unmute?
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the fantastic introduction. I hope you can all see my screen and the slides are on display for you.
We can see it perfectly, Indira.
Awesome, fantastic. Yeah, thank you again for the intro. Again, like I said, it's a pleasure to be part of the conversation today and share what I know. So I thought before we talk about the vision for a global UDI system, it might be nice to just take a moment to consider, why do we need standard identifiers, right? So if we just take a moment to imagine a life without standards, you will see that it's not, that it's really difficult to have a life without standards. Apologies, I just want to make sure you can still see my screen. Please, anybody, audio ping for me if you can't see screen or if you see any difficulty at all in hearing me at any time, just do an audio ping because I'm not paying attention to the chat box. So why do we need standard identifiers? So if you just take a moment to think about a world without standards, it would be completely chaotic, whether it is just from a traffic light to charging your iPhones or what have you. Standards are super important, and that's no different for device identification as well. So if we did not have standards, at least for the US, we've had the Global Unique Identification Database, and the UDI rule has been out since 2013. But before that, right, what was the world like for device identification? And it is true across the globe in several places that don't have a device identification standard system in place. If you just take a syringe and think about how that syringe could be identified, throughout the supply chain, as it passes through the supply chain, every single point of exchange, depending on the context, could have a different number. The manufacturer, let's say, would manufacture the syringe. They would assign a catalog number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It will move to the distributor. The distributor could assign a product number, and then it would go to the hospital, which may assign their own item number to track. So everybody has a different identification system, mainly because there is no standard system to identify devices. So what happens then is you don't have an easy way to accurately identify the product. So if this is a slide from Becton Dickinson, a device manufacturer. So if you look at the first row here, 382268, it's a catalog number assigned by Becton Dickinson to their catheter, peripheral venous catheter. Now that number is just a number made up by Becton Dickinson based on their system. It has no meaning outside of Becton Dickinson. So Dentsply, which is another device manufacturer, if you look at the last column on this slide and the table, they identified 382268 means a completely different product to Dentsply. Now, if you look at the last row, 305905, that's a Becton Dickinson syringe, but it could also be a Carl Zeiss medical device product. So numbers really only have value, depending on the context and where they are. They don't really have a standard identification system that will help. So what this means is, in order to, for example, for you to know that 305905 is a Becton Dickinson syringe, you need to know that that number is coming from BD. So you need to have 30905 and the fact that it's a Becton Dickinson product to be able to accurately identify it. So you need multiple attributes to identify a device accurately. However, there are additional data issues, things like 350 different ways that Becton Dickinson as a company could be named will complicate this issue, right? So one system may have it as BD, another system may spell it out as Becton Dickinson, and the product numbers, as I said, changes based on the context. So all of these additional data issues make it really challenging to accurately identify devices. And why is that important, right? That's important because as a device passes through every point of exchange within the supply chain, you need to now maintain multiple data attributes to identify a given device. So not only do you need to keep that data, you need to maintain it, you need to update it, and you need to reconcile it. If there are, think products that are discontinued, what if Becton Dickinson assigns that number to a different syringe and they stop making the 22 gauge needle and they start now assigning it to a 20 gauge needle, right? You need to update that all through those connection points throughout the supply chain. So it's essentially increased healthcare costs. There is higher chance of medical errors because you're depending on multiple attributes. And you also don't have a way to accurately identify devices in safety reporting that you may get. Becton Dickinson may file a safety report on the syringe with 30905. That hospital, which also sees an issue, might file a safety report with you, which may have their own item number. And if you at the FDA or wherever, in whichever regulatory body, you're looking to aggregate those reports, you are unable to link them as the same event because of the same device. And of course, think about recalls. When you are having such a difficult time identifying devices, pulling recall devices off the shelf will also be equally difficult to accomplish. So there are definitely benefits to standard identification. And what standard identification and having a standard way to identify medical devices allows us to do is to accurately identify devices throughout that distribution chain, all the way through every exchange point in that supply chain, all the way to patient use. And what it does is it helps us to accurately identify. You don't need multiple attributes to identify a device. You have that number. You can be confident that that number, that UDI, relates directly to that syringe or that catheter or that stent, and there is no confusion. You can then have an accurate way to document that device use within the patient electronic health record, which will lead to rich source of real-world data. And real-world data is very important for analyzing device performance over time, and also for safety signal detection through adverse event reporting. It's also super helpful with recalls, essentially getting recall products. We need to get them off the shelf as soon as possible to make sure they're not used for patient care. So what are the steps to establishing a standard identification system? You'll hear a lot about this throughout the two-day webinar. But for the US FDA, it meant that we had to develop a standardized national system. And we did that through the publishing of the FDA UDI rule. And the rule requires that all medical devices that are sold in the United States must have a unique device identifier on the label of the device, sometimes directly marked on the device. And device identification data must be submitted to the FDA Global Unique Device Identification Database, or the GUID ID, as we call it. And we want to integrate and incorporate UDIs throughout the healthcare ecosystem, all the way through supply chain into patient care and documentation through electronic health records. And just to briefly talk about how standard identifiers are created, I told you how lack of standardization, right? The manufacturer makes up their own number, distributor assigns a number, hospital assigns a number. But in a standardized system, at least for the US, the way we have it set up is the UDI rule basically essentially set up the system of issuing agencies. Issuing agencies or organizations that establish a standardized way to identify devices. And we have accredited 3 such issuing agencies to operate in the United States. So labelers or manufacturers of medical devices could go to these issuing agencies that have been accredited by the FDA and get essentially an entity identifier. So if I want to make medical devices and sell them in the United States, I would go to one of these issuing agencies and get an entity identifier for my company. Let's say my entity identifier is Indira. So I take that, and if I want to make pens, I would just assign Indira. There would always be an entity identifier, and then I would call this white pen version 1, white pen 1. And then if I make red pen, I would say Indira red pen 1. Blue pen Indira, blue pen 1. So there is a system to assign these, and these issuing agencies will have a system, and you will once you sign up to one of them, you have to follow their system. And then if I change how this pen looks, I may make this model 2. If I want to do that, then I have to say Indira white pen 2. And the issuing agency will give you the rules when you have to change the identifier and when a new identifier needs to be assigned. So there is a process and there is a standardized way. And once that is established, there is no confusion in identifying this pen. It doesn't matter whether it's the hospital, it's the distributor, or the electronic health record. There will be no confusion. The data will be in the Global Unique Device Identification database, and you can easily access information about this device at any time. So the global UDI landscape is growing with regard to UDI. There is a lot of activity. All the countries in the dark blue on the left side table show you where the UDI regulation is currently in place. And all the countries in light blue are all currently working on a UDI regulation. So the vision for a global UDI system then is a harmonized system, right? Just like we have the supply chain, right, across each part of the supply chain having a different number. We don't want each country in the world having a different UDI system that doesn't harmonize with another country. To the extent possible, noting that there will always be differences, we want to strive to have a harmonized system where we harmonize around the core data elements we think are essential to identify a medical device and the definitions, right? What does it mean when we say that? What does it mean when we say brand name? You know, if we can all converge on a harmonized definition, then I think device identification will be that much better across the globe, because this is a global landscape that we're living in today. It would be helpful to have a centralized repository of device identification information, and we want to achieve integration of UDIs across the global supply chain so that patient safety can be served accordingly. One example I want to give you that was evident recently was there was an issue we had with a sterilizer that was based in Italy. They were sterilizing products in Italy and they were being imported into the United States. And there was an issue with the sterilizer, and we were trying to assess the impact and the number of devices that were impacted by this. So issues are global, and it turned out that it wasn't just the US the products in the medical devices that were impacted was really across the globe on these. So proper identification of products that were being sterilized at the sterilizer, that were being imported into the US, having the UDIs was hugely beneficial to us. So as we all think about a global UDI system, my colleague Mike Simpson will speak more to some fantastic work that has occurred through global cooperation and collaboration by all the regulators for the UDI system. Harmonization is what I want to leave you with. And finally, it's a challenging place we are working under, and I want to leave you with this quote and give you a second to read this. I really like the message that it is providing. It's always difficult to change the order of things, but we must forge on for a good cause. So thank you all for having me today. I look forward to continued discussion. And Reza, I turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Indira. Thank you for explaining the benefits of having a system for identification of devices and the importance of them having a standardized and global approach to do that. We appreciate you being here. Next, I would like to introduce Elio Pilo, who is an advisor of Anvisa's Medical Devices Office. He received his Doctorate of Science in Systems and Computer Engineering from the University of Rio de Janeiro in 2014. Previously, he served as a system analyst, a researcher in telecommunications, and professor of computer science. Elio joined Anvisa in 2015 and served as business analyst previously, chief information security officer, and currently now an advisor. He is also an author of published papers in referred journals such as Theoretical Computer Science, Discrete Applied Mathematics, and Algorithmica. Elio, you're welcome to take the floor, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to speak in English, but in Portuguese, I'm sorry. But I appreciate all the presentation, and I'm glad to be here in this event. Okay, so I'm going to switch now to Portuguese. A gente vai introduzir agora.
Okay, so today we are going to introduce a vision for the global UDI system. My name is Elio, like Veza said, and I work as an advisor at Brazilian Health Regulatory Agency, Anvisa. So we're going to have a 10-minute presentation, and I'm going to, in this presentation, stress once we are considering the implementation of global UDIs or UDIs globally and actually reaching the last point, which is the future vision for the UDI system. So I'm going to slowly bring real examples for UDIs in a practical point of view, the implementation of the UDI system in the world, then in Brazil. And as a conclusion, I'm going to mention what is happening towards a future view. So the starting point was GHTF in 2008, where we discussed that post-market was a challenge for manufacturers, users, and regulatory agencies. Correctional actions, they need a good tracking system for products. At that moment, we had identification systems in place. They were enabled for a machine to read the product identification. But at the time, we needed economic logistics. That was the main proposal. We didn't have other attributions and a good tracking system. And the idea was to introduce UDI so that we could evolve in that sense, so that the post-market actions could be more robust with this type of identification. And as a consequence, we would have an increase in security in medical devices by users, optimization of processes and health services, cost reduction, and as a future vision, we have an efficient system, an efficient model of a global system that was global. So here on this slide, I'm going to give you a practical example for UDIs, where we have a membrane oxygenator. And on the right side, we can see the label of this product, which has all information regarding serial number, the expiration date of the product. And this is a part of the identification of this product on the human reading at the bottom side of the barcode, as well as the machine reading of the barcode. So this is the membrane oxygenator, and it was very much used during the COVID-19 pandemic. And here we are going to see an app where you can get very easily at your cell phone app store. And here we're using the FDA base as an example. And you can see here all the information about this device, like the commercial name, if it's labeled as not made with natural rubber latex, what is the name on GMDN, information about how to handle it and store it, and as well as other information, so customer service and things like that. We have several countries around the world that are implementing this UDI. This is an example with the American database, but we do have countries all over Europe, Africa, Asia, basically, actually all continents are currently working on UDI implementation. I brought a few examples of countries that are currently implementing or have a more advanced implementation of UDI systems. So we have countries that have UDI being regulated, so they have a current regulation for UDIs, and other than that, they already have available databases. So this data about the devices and their characteristics can be submitted. So we have Saudi Arabia, China, South Korea, United States, Europe, Japan, Singapore, and Taiwan. So we already have these countries with a great information system that is developed and is in implementation phase for the UDIs. What about Brazil? In Brazil, before we started our implementation, as an assumption, we wanted to conclude the guidance of IMDRF based on UDIs. So there was a guide that was published on December 2013, as well as the system application guide of UDIs that was published in December 2018. From July 7th, 2020, Anvisa announced that UDIs would be now a priority. Right after that, we put together a work group in Anvisa for the standardization of UDIs in Brazil. But since these assumptions are specifically for us to have the IMDRF guides, our main guideline was to be as close as possible to these IMDRF guides. So the work group lasted for 6 months, and it ended in April 2021. After that, we did a regulatory impact analysis, which decided on the assumption of the analysis itself, but there was a study to be able to justify, basically bring all the justifications based on decrees, national decrees, and between July and September, we went to public consultation on the standard that we published. From September to December 2021, we had the evaluation of the public consultation. We were very happy because us who were predicting how we're building the normative that was as close as possible to IMDRF, everyone who contributed with public consultation, they also had the same feeling that we were totally aligned. So then in December 2021, there was deliberation on the collegiate board of Anvisa on standardization of UDIs. And in January 4th, 2022, we started the currency of this standard in Brazil. So it's now current. Actually, connected to what I was saying before, I saw we had a recent update, and we can update the presentation as well about the legislation on UDIs in Brazil, and that started in January 4th, 2022.
And as a comment on the global vision of UDI, I would like to say that Brazil is strongly committed to implementing UDI and support this adherence by other countries. A lot of contributions that we noticed in the public consultation, or many of them, really required some exceptions that were not really foreseen in the IMDRF document. So our main justification to not have those requirements was the support of a global adoption of a UDI system. So these exceptions could not optimize this global implementation. So Brazil tried to adhere to the IMDRF guidance to enforce a global UDI system implementation. Just like Indira also mentioned in her presentation, most of the continents have at least one country implementing the UDI system. There are different stages. Brazil started its regulation a few days ago, and there are other countries that are more advanced and already working with that for several years. The UDI system is being strengthened, especially because manufacturers are already building systems to submit UDI data to UDI databases. And the more standardized the databases are, the easier it will be to have this data available and synchronized. So for us, UDI has been strengthened as a vigilance global system. And in the next few years, we will be advancing in this initiative. That would be from my end. I thank you for the pleasure of being here, and give the floor to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elio. Thank you for sharing some really good examples and visuals on how it works in the real world, as well as providing an update on how Brazil is approaching this topic in implementing a global UDI system. Thank you very much. Before we move on to the next topic, I just want to remind everyone that has joined us today, you are welcome to input your questions in the question and answer box. So that is available, and you can do that at any time. You don't have to wait until the question and answer session. We'll be reading those questions as we receive them. I think we're ready to move on, excuse me, to our next topic, which is the overview of UDI and IMDRF documents. It is my pleasure to introduce the speaker for this topic, Lieutenant Commander Michael Simpson, who has started his career with FDA as an investigator in ORA, where he accomplished numerous inspections at FDA-regulated establishments, domestically and foreign. He then transferred to be an engineer review and regulatory officer within CDRH, where he reviewed pre-market applications and compliance for infusion pumps, pen injectors, and general hospital devices. His current role is project manager of the UDI program. Lieutenant Commander Simpson is a graduate of the University of Maryland with a Master's of Engineering in Project Management and a Bachelor's of Science in Mechanical Engineering. Welcome, Michael, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vesa. So I will be, as she mentioned, discussing the FDA's, US FDA's regulations, as well as recent updates for UDI. So in 2007, the US Congress directed the FDA to establish the UDI system in the FDA Amendments Act of 2007, and then imposed in specific timeframes in the FDA Safety and Innovations Act of 2012. The UDI final rule was signed on September 24th, 2013, and the FDA implementation is currently still underway in the United States. The FDA developed the UDI system through activities such as accrediting issuing agencies, creating the Good ID and Access Good ID systems, and helping stakeholders through activities such as issuing guidance documents and other technical documents, and holding webinars and user sessions such as this. As previously mentioned, this rule established a UDI system to develop a standardized system of creating UDI, placing UDI on labels and sometimes direct marking of the device, creating and maintaining the Good ID system, as well as adoption and implementation. The rule had two key requirements: that device label and sometimes the actual device through direct marking must bear UDI. The UDI must be provided in two forms: easily readable plain text and automatic identification and data capture, AIDC technology. In addition, the key data must be submitted to the Good ID Global Unique Device Identification Database. Now let's get into what the UDI actually is. The Unique Device Identifier provides a standard way to identify devices composed of two parts: the DI, Device Identifier, and the PI, Product Identifier. Here you can see an example of the UDI from each of the three FDA accredited issuing agencies in the United States: GS1, HIBIC, and ICPA. There are various forms of the AIDC that can be used, and the easily readable plain text form of the UDI is also required on the device label and the device packages. The manufacturer has an option to choose one of the three issuing agencies to generate their UDI. The yellow part that you can see there is the DI, the device identifier, the static portion of the UDI for a given version or model of the device. Once assigned to a device, this does not change. This is what is given the power to aggregate information and is required to be entered in the Good ID database. The green portion is the PI, the product identifier, conditional or variable portion of the UDI that identifies how a device is controlled in production. This will be helpful to identify implants to pull the correct products off the shelf during a recall. This also includes the lot or batch number, serial number, expiration date, manufacturing date, and other distinct identification codes. It is required on the label, and in some cases, the device itself, as mentioned. And the ability to scan the UDI's machine readable format is the part of what makes UDI using it so beneficial. As we have seen in other industries, the ability to read information contained on the label in an automated way can save time and money, and it's less prone to human error. As you can see from this table, the US FDA's UDI system is well underway. Most classes of devices are now required to comply with UDI requirements, with the exception of Class 1 and unclassified devices that are non-implantable, life-supporting, or life-sustaining. The rule established implementation dates based on device class and risk. The highest risk class devices having to comply first. Class 3 devices, implants, life-sustaining, life-supporting, and then Class 2 devices, compliance dates have passed. Requirements for Class 1 and unclassified devices have passed as well. However, we have communicated in compliance policy via guidance that we will not enforce these requirements until September 24th, 2022. This additional time is to allow labelers of Class 1 and unclassified devices more time to address challenges of implementation with UDI requirements, including those of COVID-19 pandemic. So essentially, after September 24th, 2022, all devices are required to bear a UDI and should have met the requirements, and data should be within the Good ID database. While the United States was the first jurisdiction to begin implementation of the UDI system, we have worked internationally with many other jurisdictions along the way. This map, as Indira also showed, shows the jurisdictions that participated in the latest IMDRF, International Medical Device Regulators Forum, UDI working group. The purpose of this working group was to promote a globally harmonized approach to the application of a UDI system, starting with the principles laid down in the general IMDRF UDI guidance document published in 2013. The work group was intended to contribute to the achievements and perceived benefits of UDI for regulators and stakeholders implementing the UDI around the globe. As a result of this working group, IMDRF has published 4 guidance documents that will provide an overview on the next few slides. The first document was N7, and it provided framework for regulatory authorities that intend to develop their UDI system in a globally harmonized approach. It discusses the overall goals and benefits of the UDI, as well as definitions and general principles related to the UDI itself, the UDI carrier, and the UDI database. The next document was the N48 in 2019. The application guide is intended to provide the details and specifications necessary to ensure consistency for enabling a harmonized approach in the application of the requirements set forth in the 2013 IMDRF UDI guidance, N7. This document discusses the guiding principles for UDI system design and operations, as well as specific information about the UDI carrier, and so on. N53 contained an annex comparing the UDI database, UDID, system fields across the EU, US, and identified in the N7 IMDRF document. Here's an example of some of the UDI data elements from N7 used across different IMDRF jurisdictions. As you can see here, not only does the document compare the different data elements across the jurisdictions to the IMDRF data elements, but it also includes information on whether the jurisdiction's database requires that element. This document was produced in an Excel format for ease of use. And lastly, N54 provides some general system requirements related to the use of UDI and healthcare, including selected use cases demonstrating how recording UDI combined with pulling data from the UDI database is used in auto-populate information into forms and electronic information. The US FDA's UDI webpage contains a lot of helpful resources for stakeholders. One particularly helpful page is UDI resources page, partially displayed here. Here we list all of the UDI guidance documents, as well as training and other technical documents available to the public. The next few slides will provide an update from US FDA. The UDI form and contents final guidance published in July 2021. This document was intended to assist labelers and FDA accredited issuing agencies in complying with UDI labeling requirements. This document added references to internationally used terms from the recent IMDRF UDI guide. The term data delimiter, as used in this guidance, corresponds to the term qualifier as used in the ISO 15459 Part 3 automatic identification and data capture techniques, the common rule, as well as UDI N48 from IMDRF, the application guide. Additionally, issuing agencies or other entities may refer to this easily readable plain text form of the UDI as the human readable interpretation, HRI. FDA's most recent guidance, published in draft on October 13, 2021, explains that there are certain class 1 devices for which FDA does not intend to enforce the Good ID submission requirements, Global Unique Device Identification Database under 21 CFR 830.300, and describes how a labeler of a class 1 device can determine whether its device is within the scope of this compliance policy. It mentions the term consumer health product, which means a 510(k) exempt class 1 device that are exclusively sold to a consumer over the counter in both brick and mortar and online stores. These devices are typically labeled with the UPC, Universal Product Code, which may serve as the UDI for class 1 devices under 21 CFR 801.40D. We're currently evaluating the comments received from this draft guidance. The Good ID database is FDA's database that contains the DI portion of the UDI and associated data elements required to be submitted by the labelers of medical devices. Labelers can submit their record through the web or through HL7 SPL. Labelers must keep their records updated throughout its life cycle as the company goes through mergers and acquisitions, and as versions or models are no longer distributed, as well as when new versions or models are brought to life. There is a new Good ID record that must be submitted and it will go through that device's life cycle. And all along the way, it's extremely important to ensure that there is good data quality because this data will be used in downstream systems. Most of the information submitted to GoodID is also available to the public through Access GoodID. We launched Access GoodID in 2015 to make data available for the users. The portal is managed by the National Library of Medicine, and the data is uploaded daily. Access GoodID offers search and retrieval, along with data downloads and useful application programming interfaces, or APIs. APIs include the ability to look up device info by passing a DI, parsing it, or parsing a UDI into bits and lists of implant devices, as well as a SNOMED code given for a device. If you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at FDA's UDI Help Desk, either available on the US FDA's website or by emailing us at goodidsupport@fda.hhs.gov. That concludes my presentation, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present.
Thank you very much, Michael, for providing the overview of IMDRF documents related to UDI. With that, I would like to invite all the speakers to turn on your cameras. And I think we're ready to move to the question and answer session. I already see there's some questions coming in. In addition to that, I also invite my good colleague, Patty Pineda, to also help with the session and the questions and the answers. Thank you, Patty, for joining. I think we also have Melissa. I see Melissa has joined too. Okay, I think we're ready to start. Why don't we start with the first question? Patty, do you mind reading that question for us?
Yeah, sure. So the first question is from Clarina Cruz, and she's asking, does the UDI allows for a genetic standardization of the medical devices names?
Would you like me to respond to that? I could take a shot at it. This is Indira from US FDA. Standardization of names, I don't believe so. We do define what a brand name should be, and standardization is possible if we as regulators across the globe gather and standardize the brand name definition and coalesce around, a uniform definition. I think that would help. But at this time, as we have it defined in the US FDA UDI rule, brand name, we have a definition on what we intend brand name to mean.
I would also like to add that I believe in Helio's presentation, I'm sorry, I don't know Portuguese, but he displayed the UDI's app, which demonstrated a GMDN code, which is the common terminology for that device. So that is, in a way, how we are able to parse out particular devices based on the use or common name.
Great point, Michael. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we can go on to the next question, Patty.
Okay, next question is from Priscilla Maldonado, and she's asking, how long does it take to implement a UDI? I believe it's the UDI system.
The entire UDI system takes years.
Yeah.
We're still, continuing on. I believe all the UDI, all the device classes by September 2022, this year, will finally have met all the compliance dates and the compliance policies that we've put in place and extensions that we provided from the US FDA side would all be wrapped up, we are hoping, by 2024 in September. As far as, so I'm not sure whether your question is from the perspective of a regulator or your question is how long does it take to implement it from the perspective of a manufacturer, and the timelines would vary. And it also, of course, depends on the amount of resources you're willing to invest. So hope that answers your question. I'm happy to further elaborate or clarify as you need.
Thank you, Indira. Elio or Michael, would you like to add anything to that?
Eu posso adicionar no
Sure,
Brasil.
I can add from Brazil's point of view. So in Brazil, we predict that we are going to have 6 years for the implementation of this in the industry. And in those 6 years, the industry will be in compliance with the UDI application in devices, labels, and outside packaging. And this deadline may increase in 2 years if it has a direct label because of technology matters. And for the implementation of the information system that is going to store the UDI data, these timelines are also going to be the same, but starting from the completion of the development of the information system. So like Indira said very well, from the perspective of the regulator, we are going to take a decade, basically. Us, we are just starting in Brazil's case.
Thank you very much, Elio. I would also like to see maybe if I see that you've also answered 2 questions that were asked in Portuguese. Is it okay if I ask you to explain the question and the answer just for the rest of us as well?
Ok, você quer que eu comece com o
Sure, would
Juliet?
you like me to start with Juliet? Juliet's
Yes,
question?
please. Yes.
O Juliet perguntou
Okay, so Juliet asked how long Anvisa took to be able to implement UDIs in Anvisa with the industry. So this question might need a little bit of clarification, just because it wasn't very clear if they're talking about the development of the standardization of UDIs, or as was said in the previous question, if it's about the UDI implementation itself. In Brazil's case, I ended up answering the first possibility because we haven't finished the implementation of the UDI system yet, so it's not yet fulfilled. What we have finished at the moment is the regulation, and the regulation took approximately 1 year in Brazil, and we involved hospital associations, we involved medical device manufacturer associations, and the main stakeholders and the main players in the UDI system when it becomes regulated. So it was around a year, but of course, this is something that has an entire work that is done behind that 1 year, which is the work that was done in IMDRF, the other countries that have implemented this, the US as an example. The second question was from Ruth Ospina, and she was asking about if the standardization of medical devices in Anvisa will be total or if it will be classified according to risk groups. This is a question that may need a little bit more clarification as well, because the way that it's written, apparently they're talking about the standardization of the names of medical devices, and that in this case, the answer could be aligned to what Michael Simpson said, which is we have a few countries where we have GMDN as one of the essential elements on the UDI database for each jurisdiction. But if the question is about the implementation, so the fulfillment of the implementation of UDIs in Brazil, then that would be a different answer. Here, as I said on the previous question, the implementation will be according to risk, so not all medical devices will be done at the same time, and it will be done the following way. For a high risk class, it's going to be half a year, so 6 months. For lower risk, we would have 6 years. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elio, for even giving us more details. I really appreciate that. So I would like to read the next question, which comes from Jessica, is, oops, I lost the question. Maybe it was taken off.
It was answered
I was
by
answered.
Indira,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, so the question was, is there any rationale adopted by the FDA for the implementation of the database Good ID and then of the UDI in labeling? The answer that Indira gave, maybe Indira, you would like to provide the answer live?
Sure.
Just so
Apologies.
everyone it can be translated. Thank you.
Of course. Actually, the UDI rule requirements to have UDI on the label of the device and information, device identification information submitted to the Good ID, the Global Unique Device Identification Database, are exactly at the same time. So whenever the compliance date for a given device has to be met within that same compliance date, both the requirements need to be met. They are in parallel at the same time.
Perfect, thank you for that. Also, there was a question related to does UDI include combo products? And I see Indira provided an answer from the FDA perspective, stating that the UDI rule requirements apply to combination products that contain a device constituent part.
Correct.
Maybe Elio, is there a maybe you can provide an Anvisa perspective on this question as well?
Aqui no nosso caso,
Well, here in our case, and I think that it's also that way in Europe, ours is inverted. So first, we have the deadlines happening for labels. And the deadline for submission of information into the database starts happening when the information system that is going to receive the data is ready. So it's going to happen in different moments.
Okay, thank you, Elio. I would like to just to ask the speakers, because we're reading the questions live, we can read them and we can answer them live. And just another question that was already answered. In the Good ID platform, can you access the instructions for use and labels of the medical devices? And I appreciate Indira's answer here, stating no, we do not capture label information or instructions for use in the Good ID at this time. With that, Patty, would you be so kind to read the next question, please?
Next question is, has this standardization been useful for the management of medical devices shortages?
For the US FDA, we are exploring how we can use this, but what the data elements that would help us to assess shortages specifically are we capture the commercial whether the status of the commercial distribution of a device. Is a current device, is a device in question currently being distributed in the United States? If not, what is the commercial distribution end date? That's the information we currently capture in the Good ID. This gives us an idea, of the distribution status of the device, but we are finding that we have to go and gather additional information to really determine a shortage situation. So while all of that data is not available, the Good ID definitely provides us a starting point to begin that, to begin looking at to make a shortage assessment.
Thank you very much. The next question is, do you know the schedule of implementation in Europe and when is the deadline? We're not sure about that. I don't know if Melissa is still online, and if Melissa can comment on this question. Okay, we will have to take this question and maybe answer it another time since we don't have that information handy right now. Moving on to the next question. Patty?
Yes, we have one that perhaps we're going to be needing a little bit more explanation or detail because it only says, what does this harmonization involve? So I don't know if we could ask Sulma Balbuena if she could elaborate a little bit on the question. And we can circle back to that one. So the next question is, I also have a question regarding if the UDI within the whole life cycle of the medical device also provides the location when there's a final disposition of a medical device.
As I mentioned, this is Indira again for the US FDA. As I mentioned, we do capture the commercial distribution end date for a given device. So device manufacturers are expected to get back into the database and update when they stop commercially distributing the device. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Indira. Next question.
Okay, next question. That's a very long one. So it says, in Mexico, there's just been a new regulation issued in which is requested for the distributors that in case the medical device has a UDI label, they should have traceback systems. In this case, how can you do the traceback system for distributors, sub-distributors, and final clients? Does the traceback system must be audited, and how these processes are conducted?
In the US FDA, we don't really have track and trace requirements associated with the UDI rule. Our drug sister center, Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, are considering that, but that's not something that's associated with the UDI rule as we have it. I will call upon Mike Simpson to see if he has anything to add on some of the requirements and device history records and so on that may, from his compliance background, that he could add to this question.
Aqui no Brasil, tal qual no FDA.
Well, here in Brazil, just like FDA, it's the same case. It's always interesting to remember that UDI consists of two elements, the PI and DI. So the information for a tracking system would so that the system could track and trace, they would have to have the UDI PI information. And in Brazil, the only pieces of information that are mandatory to be sent together with the essential elements of the medical devices is the UDI DI. And that is why we do not have so far a prediction of implementing a track and trace system.
Thank you. Michael, did you want to add anything to that question?
Sure. Unique device identifier is mentioned in the most common FDA regulations, 21 CFR 820, underneath the device labeling, 820.120, device history record, 820.184, as well as complaint documentation for complaint files, 820.198.
Okay, thank you for that addition. I think we're ready for the next question.
Hi, Next question says, through the UDI-DI and the UDI-PI characteristics, this has been allowed to identify the medical devices. So apart from that, has it been possible to identify another variables or characteristics that impact in a regulatory fashion the UDI for the identification during the implementation of the system?
I'm not sure I understood the question, Patty.
So I guess that what they are asking is that aside from all the factors and characteristics and data that goes into the UDI-DI and the UDI-PI, is there any other data that might be useful or that might be needed, required to the correct identification of the medical devices? Or is it enough with the UDI-DI and the UDI-PI?
Right, okay, I can take a shot at this. So the UDI, right, the intent of what is in the UDI, the device identifier and the production identifier, the intent there is to have enough information to accurately capture the movement of that device through the supply chain. And that's why it's what we're capturing is the device identifier, which identifies a model or a version and the manufacturer. And then the PI pieces, which tell you the lot, the batch, the serial, and so on. But to really identify a device, I mean, there are so many other characteristics, things such as MRI safety. Does the device contain latex? Is it a combination product? You know, is it part of a kit? These are all additional attributes that will help us identify and find a device better. So if you are a healthcare provider, that data elements that you look for to identify a device will be very different, right? You want all this extra information to find something. Is it a stent? You know, what are you looking for? So device identification, really, it depends on the perspective of the user and what you are trying to identify at a given moment. So the GoodID database has all the data elements we think will serve the overall needs of a large, diverse group of stakeholders. But what is in that UDI itself, the DI and the PI, are specifically, those are just the elements that you need to successfully identify a device as it moves through the distribution to patient use. That's all that DI and PI provides. But the whole gamut of other attributes that you may need to identify a device are available in the GoodID. I hope that helps.
And as Indira mentioned, on our website, there is a GoodID data elements reference table, which states which data elements are required or optional. And then when you're working with your issuing agency, when you're building your PI portion of your UDI, you'll have the option which particular data elements you would like to include that are not required.
Thank you, Michael. Next question.
Okay, so next question is for Elio. I'm going to try to read it as is, just for the sake of the translation. So bear with my Portuguese. So, o que a Anvisa espera dos prestadores de serviços de saúde em termos da adesão e uso regular por eles?
So what does Anvisa expect from the service providers in health?
Várias contribuições, tanto no grupo de trabalho quanto na consulta pública, justamente dos serviços de saúde em que eles...
We've had some help in the public consultation and health providers in Brazil. So from our perspective, at this point, we will have a good adherence from the healthcare services, especially because they are going to be one of the groups that will mostly consume data from the medical devices. So I believe the adherence will be very well received.
Thank you, Elio. Patty, do you mind continuing on the next question?
Next question is, what are the challenges that have been identified by regulators and medical devices manufacturers?
In implementing the UDI rule, the challenges?
Yes.
Okay. You know, we could talk about it now, or I think that is you have the day 2. I think there is an entire session on implementation experience of different regulators. So I defer to you, Patty and Wesa, how you want to do that question.
Yes, I think I'll take an opportunity here to remind everyone, because we do have a second session coming up next week, the 27th, where we also have invited other regulators to really speak about this topic a little bit more. And so we will take this and we will follow up on this in the next session.
Yeah, and if I may add, not only other regulators, but also representatives from the industry and from healthcare
Yes.
providers. So we're going to have like a more comprehensive vision of what it has been to implement the UDI systems.
Exactly. Thank you, Patty. So tune in for that question.
So next question
one.
is from Sulma Balbuena. We said that we were going to circle back to her, and she just had included that what does the UDI implementation involves. So I guess that like the basic needs or the basic inputs that we need to develop the UDI system, I'm thinking. It is not very clear. Can you
So
take a shot at it?
I would first recommend looking into the 3, if you are trying to distribute within the United States, looking at the 3 issuing agencies. Most commonly, GS1 is used, but there are 2 others depending on your product, and speaking with them, reaching out to them, and starting that process. They are experts at creating the UDI and making sure that they meet the requirements of US FDA.
Okay, thank you, Michael. The next question, and just to remind everyone, so we have 2 minutes left. We'll do our best to answer the questions, and if we can't, I think there's some questions here that we could cover in the next session. The question is there any rationale adopted by the FDA for the implementation, first of the database Good ID and then of the UDI and labeling?
Yeah, I think we answered this question, but perhaps not, or maybe I answered it by typing the answer in. The UDI requirements, the UDI rule requirements for the US FDA are in parallel. So the UDI must be on the label of the device, and the information must be in the database by the compliance state. So it's not one after another at the same time.
Thank you for clarifying that, Indira. Patty?
Okay, the next question is, if a country decides to use the codification for medical devices as is contemplated by the UDI, does the access to this data would have any cost?
Right now, all the data available in the Global Unique Device Identification Database is publicly available, free of cost to anyone all across the world. I believe Michael had a slide on Access Good ID. That is the portal that you can access all data submitted to the US FDA Global Unique Device Identification Database, free of cost.
No Brasil também está previsto na nossa regulamentação.
In Brazil, we also foresee that in our regulation, the access to data will be free and public to everyone.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Go
the
ahead.
next question. I guess the Solma has elaborated a little bit on her question. So she says, Michael presented a slide where she showed a group of countries that have already harmonized the UDI. My question is, what does this harmonization means for each of the countries? Is there any, is this mandatory that they have to use it 100% UDI or not?
So the harmonization that I mentioned was through the International Medical Device Regulators Forum. And that harmonization is where the countries I mentioned got together to create the 4 guidance documents in regards to UDI compliance and UDI application and implementation. So even though those countries involved did get together to do that, US and Brazil both in attendance here, the time period that implementation occurred, it did vary. So for example, EU, we're not experts on their time frame of implementation, but it's not as far along in the requirements as US FDA. But there is a different, potentially a different time window based on each country that participated.
Thank you, Michael. I think since we're already past the time for our agenda, I just want to say thank you so much for all the questions. I think it was a lot of good questions that were asked. I see there's some other questions left, I believe about 4. And so what we're going to do is take those questions and then apply them to our next session and try to answer them. So with that, I really want to be respectful of everybody's time, and I hate to cut it short. But with that, I just want to say, one, to thank the speakers for participating today and starting us in some really good discussions related to UDI. As mentioned before, we have a second session next week, and really we're gonna, it's gonna offer a little bit more discussion and different perspectives related to UDI. So we welcome your participation in that next session. With that, I would like to turn it over to Sandra to see if she has any other closing remarks before we end the session. Thank you, everybody.
Besa, thank you very much, and thank you very much for all the speakers and the attendees. I think it was evident that there's a lot of interest on the stakeholders to learn about UDI. All these initiatives going on throughout not only Latin America, but worldwide to advance in this topic is definitely something that we need to help all stakeholders to get on top of and get the necessary knowledge as to be prepared to contribute for the time when the regulations at a particular country are being issued or built, and also for the implementation stages. So really, thank you very much for this initial session. We look forward to have all of you participating in the next session next week. We will take the questions that have not been answered open today to make sure that we provide an answer to you, hopefully during the next session, otherwise via email. Again, please pass the voice for whomever has not had visibility yet on these webinars so they can register and attend, and look forward to meet you all next week. Thank you very much.